All right, good evening, everybody. It's nice to see all these smiling faces. I am calling to order the special meeting of the Sonoma City Council for Wednesday, June the 5th, 2024. It's 5 o'clock p.m. This is a special meeting with the joint City Council and Planning Commission. And we will forego the nuance of the meeting and
Just going to let the record reflect that the City Council is all present, as is the Planning Commission, with the exception of Chair Barnett and Commissioner O'Gorman and Youth Commissioner Miller. Thank you.
Thank you. So items for discussion, City Council and Planning Commission discussion on the general plan update. Ms. Jennifer Gates.
We do have a presentation. It's coming up. There it is. Woohoo. All right, Jennifer Gates, Community Development Director. Thank you very much, City Council and Planning Commission, for tonight's meeting. I am just going to be very brief and just say we're looking forward to your guys' comments tonight. But before we get into that, we are going to have a presentation by our consultant, De Novo Planning Group, which is Ben Ritchie. And he's going to talk a little bit about what we've done so far in this process and how we are moving forward. So with that, Ben.
All right, thank you very much. Council, Commission, it's a pleasure to see you again. I believe I was last here in October of last year. So as Jennifer mentioned, I've got a very brief presentation this evening, potentially.
But you have a giant water bottle.
I do. I found this at a Little League park. It was there for 7 days in a row, and I said, you know what? No one's coming back for it.
It died. It was working earlier.
It was. Possibly.
Do we have AAAs down there or? Those 9 volts?
That's a 9 volt. Yeah. They'll just advance it for you.
There, I got the same.
He's got it. He's got batteries. Technical difficulties.
All right, without further ado, I now have a brief presentation to go over with the council and the commission. So we've got 2 basic parts for this evening. I want to emphasize we are not asking for any formal votes or formal directions. This is meant to be an informational item and discussion, and then we'll take comments and feedback from the commission and the council. So for part 1 of my presentation, I want to provide an overview of the work that has been completed to date. So most specifically, we've done our initial first flush of public outreach and community participation, and we've packaged up all of the feedback and the results in the community outreach summary report. So I'll walk you through the efforts that we've undertaken and some of the, kind of high-level findings and feedback that we received from the community. And we have also completed the existing conditions report, and I'll walk you through what that document is and, equally important, what it isn't. And the second part of our discussion is going to be a preliminary conversation with the council and the commission on potential changes or themes we should be looking at with respect to land uses and your land use map update. So I'll talk a little bit about the next steps, the process moving forward, but one of the key next steps for the project team and staff is going to be making any refinements and adjustments to your land use map and the corresponding land use designations. So in terms of our public outreach to date, we really kicked this off with a public-facing effort in November of last year, and we conducted 2 visioning workshops. These were both done again in November. So at each of these workshops, I provided a presentation overview, what the general plan is, some overview of state requirements and state law, the process for updating the general plan. This is a multi-year effort to get this work done. And then for each of the 2 workshops, we had different topics or themes where we provided activities for feedback. So we discussed topics related to land use, circulation, high-level visioning, design, placemaking, and we had mapping activities, Post-it note activities, group activities, individual activities, just lots of ways to solicit and feedback from the community. Attendance was pretty good, so I've done a lot of these in a lot of different size communities. So I think we had upwards of 40, 45 at the first workshop. Second workshop, I want to say, was in the mid-30s, so pretty decent attendance. In addition to those visioning workshops, staff also conducted a community workshop in January of this year. So additional similar activities related to the natural and built environment, community character, land use, and placemaking. Staff also conducted a total of 8 community presentations between November and January. So this was just getting information out to the community about the process, how to get involved, how to learn more about it, and how to provide input. In addition to the public workshops, we also did a series of interviews and more small setting stakeholder interviews and discussions. So we met with groups and organizations such as the school district, community center, hospital, Boys and Girls Club, various city departments, police and fire representatives, and then also kind of business economic type groups, the Chamber, Visitors Bureau, Viticultural Arts, the Vintners Growers Association, and County Economic Development. In addition to these traditional in-person workshops and stakeholder meetings, we also conducted an online survey which ran for approximately 5 months. It was available through the city's website and the general plan website, and we got a total of 181 full responses. So there were 30 some odd questions in there, and 181 separate individuals completed the survey. So all of this feedback and information that we've gathered has been packaged up in the outreach summary report. And what this document does, it provides a detailed summary of the efforts and the activities that we did. We provide, I like to call them the cliff notes. So here's kind of the short summary version of what we heard, but we're also very diligent to take all of the raw data and include it in appendices. So you can kind of read the executive summary of what we did and what we heard, and then all of the raw feedback, the actual marked up maps, the individual Post-it notes that were filled out, all that stuff is provided in the appendices for those that really want to drill down. So some of the common themes that emerged from our various outreach efforts in terms of priorities to address as part of the general plan update. We heard a lot about challenges related to affordable housing. We heard about the need to attract and retain a diverse array of jobs and businesses, the importance of maintaining a safe community. We heard a lot about the importance of improving walkability and bikeability and just general connectivity, safe routes to schools, things related to how we move outside of alternative or using alternatives to single passenger vehicles. And we also heard a lot of comments and feedback with an emphasis on social equity, sustainability, and environmental stewardship. So that was kind of a brief summary of, again, if you want to drill down into the details, hopefully everybody received a copy of the outreach summary report. The other key milestone we've completed to date is the existing conditions report. And what this document does is it provides a technical background and an overview of Sonoma's physical, environmental, economic, and demographic setting as of the fall of 2023, when most of the research was conducted and completed. What this document does is it helps establish a baseline. It's basically our starting point. So there's some amount of new research in there. There's some amount of compilation of existing reports and studies. You know, we didn't go out and conduct new studies on groundwater conditions. A lot of that information was taken from existing, studies of the groundwater basin. Same with your sewer capacity, police service ratios, things of that nature. So it's a compilation of various reports from federal, state, regional, county, and local levels. And it's intended to be a separate companion document to the general plan itself. Sonoma does a good job now. Your existing general plan kind of gets right to the point. Sometimes you crack these things open and a general plan's 400 pages long and it's got demographic data from 18 years ago that really isn't relevant to the policies that you're implementing. However, that demographic data is important for understanding your starting point. So we're going to maintain this as a separate volume from your general plan. This document also provides the environmental and regulatory baseline setting for the environmental impact report, the EIR, that will be prepared as the general plan is developed throughout the remainder of this year. So it was very much prepared with CEQA in mind. What this document is not it's not a document full of recommendations. Here's what we found, therefore you should do this via policy. It's a really kind of a black and white document in terms of here's the existing facts, here's the existing data. Now what we choose to do with that data, whether information on housing conditions or water supply conditions warrant special policy attention in the general plan, this document intentionally does not include recommendations on what we should be doing with the facts that are disclosed in the existing conditions report. So in terms of the topics addressed in this report, we cover land use and socioeconomics, economic and demographic conditions and trends, transportation, mobility, and circulation, community services and facilities, utilities, hazards and safety, which is, of course includes flooding and wildfires, community noise, conservation, and environmental justice and equity. So these are the chapter headings of the existing conditions report. It's available online, again, through the city's website and through the general plan update website. It's a big document. It's 600 plus pages, but it covers a wide array of information and facts. So that was my introductory presentation for part one. So we've concluded our initial public outreach and community participation steps. I really want to emphasize there will absolutely be additional opportunities for community participation and outreach. This wasn't just in the beginning and then we're done. We know we have to check in a lot with the community as we work our way through. And the existing conditions report is, again, published and available. So I'll entertain any questions about what I've covered so far before we move into part two, which is a discussion of possible land use topics and themes.
All right, thank you. Questions? Yes.
Yeah, could you go back to the slide where you list kind of the general issue areas that came up?
I'm sorry, from outreach or in the existing conditions report?
In both, actually. So let's do the, whichever one you, okay, challenge related. So, so does climate end up in both safe community and emphasis on social equity and environmental stewardship, or did not climate come up at all?
Climate definitely came up. It's like the term sustainability. In my mind, sustainability touches just about every single topic of a general plan update. So I think here, I don't want to use the term lumped in, but in my mind, social equity and environmental stewardship encompasses comments on climate change. But we definitely heard comments related to not only climate adaptation and resiliency, but also lowering GHG emissions and the community's climate footprint.
And I guess my point would be, I think if it's significant enough that it came up in enough times that climate should actually be stated. Because I think one of the issues that we face is that we're like frogs in the water, boiling water, where people, you know, the last 2 days are, you know, kind of examples of like what we're going to see more and more of. So I would suggest that so that we know how much, for me, it's more like how much did it come up? What level of education engagement needs to happen?
Yes, the information you seek is in the existing conditions report. I don't have a tabulation of the term climate was mentioned X number of times, but we have a much more detailed, we did a lot of workshops and got a lot of feedback, and I have, very generously synthesized that into 5 bullet points, which doesn't even begin to encapsulate the breadth of the comments we received from the community. But we have this entire outreach report dedicated to that. So by leafing through that, you can see in much more specificity or granular detail how many times people use the term climate versus sustainability versus environmental stewardship. But yeah, I didn't use that term on this slide.
I guess my point is the significance of the threat. I would like to have it, to know if it shows up here or if it wouldn't come up to this level.
And that is something I can certainly come back with in terms of a more
Okay.
specific answer in terms of how many times, greenhouse gases or climate change were mentioned in the specific feedback activities.
Great, thank you.
I don't know how deeply we want to go into the existing conditions report at this meeting, but I did notice in a few themes. One is that some items were cut and pasted and copied in different areas, but some of the numbers didn't really add up. there were discrepancies in different sections that I noticed, and I can go back and pull those out. So those might have been typographical mistakes or not QCing different data sources, but it was a little bit confusing. Secondly, some of this material is very high level. And I don't know if it's going to get deeper for us to be able to make decisions. Like, for instance, the transit, when you look at the transit section, you list that there are, 4 different routes, but there's no information about who's taking the routes or how many people we're serving or, to help us make a decision about whether we could expand it or create a transit-rich area. I can't make that determination from the sections. And similarly, the demographics, is very, again, high level. 70% of us are white, 30% of us aren't. But it didn't really go into any deeper data that might allow us to make policy decisions. So I don't know if there's an opportunity for us to have that additional information added.
In terms of, if there's data discrepancies, if you have, obviously I can only respond to specifics and I'd have to look at it. So if you have something you'd like to, convey to Jennifer and she can pass on to me, we can absolutely double check. Our job is to obviously make sure the data is correct and have, avoid internal discrepancies or any factual errors. We do go through a pretty robust QA/QC process. Sometimes different data sources may have different numbers or facts in there, but I'm happy to take another look at that to make sure we're accurate. And then similarly, if there are specific things other than transit demographics that you'd like a deeper dive on, we can certainly look and see what data is available or confer with staff in terms of any additional efforts you might want to see to study those things, particularly if they're going to lead to key policy decisions where that information will help make a decision on how you proceed with the general plan.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Ding, please.
Thank you. My question regarding the groundwater, and you mentioned, I'm not sure on how much for you to address this issue, because the water for the city is really, really an important issue, because we heavily relying on the river water and the Eel River and the Russian River. And I'm wondering, and have you done some research for the future on the resource, water resource, how to diversify? And because I want to see, and if we can wisely use our groundwater, but right now just only 15% for our city in the water district. So if we can and increase a little bit the groundwater, and at the same time we still maintain groundwater sustainability. In the long term, I think this is very important. Another thing is, I suggest maybe we can do some research and develop the new water and source. For example, in the SDC, there is a lake, and a lot of the people mention it, but I'm not sure what is the current status, because right now that is used to be state and the property and private property. Yeah, it's confusing, but if we can use that water and diversify the city's resource, it's important. Another thing is, and in this area, we have the city, Sonoma and the city in the water district, and also Valley of the Moon water district. And they have the same function, and say, I wonder if possible in the future we can, partner each other, even merge each other, and provide more better service to our local residents. Thank you.
There you go. There you go. Mr. Wellender.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. You made a comment earlier about the existing conditions, so that's going to be a separate document from the actual general plan.
Yes, sir.
One of in a broad sense, my concern is that when we pull together the ultimate general plan, that it be thin and mean and thin. And at least from my one perspective, I would like to not stuff it with a lot of fluff, because what I'm hoping for is this document that is intended to be used for the next 20 years is truly something that's inviting to not only staff, commission, and council, but for the general public. And I noticed that in terms of the existing conditions, there was a lot of duplication between charts and graphs and then verbal explanation, which may be fine for the existing conditions separate summary. But I'm just want to strongly encourage that we keep absolutely the critical information in there that makes up a general plan. But I would like not to put fluff in if possible.
We very much share the same philosophy.
Good.
I've been preparing these for a long time, and less is more. Get to the point. So.
Super. Regarding, so the sections that you had reviewed in terms of the existing conditions, the 9 chapters, 10 chapters, 11 chapters, those will be repeated then in the actual general plan, is that correct?
They will be touched on, but the general plan is not necessarily going to be organized with the same chapters and headings.
So as I expressed, I think at one of the community meetings, what did I do wrong, Jennifer?
Now this conked out again.
Oh.
I was trying to get back to the list of topics and.
One of the things that I believe I expressed, it could have been at a previous joint session, is that regarding the different sections, the circulation, whatever, I would like to strongly at least throw out consideration that we put in only sections that are required. And I think that the section, chapter 9, which is environmental justice and equity, I would love to see that not necessarily as a separate section, but that being sprinkled throughout all sections, because I think the goal is to have environmental justice and equity throughout rather than a dedicated specific chapter. At least I'd like that for a consideration. One piece of data that I would love to see if you could capture is that under transportation, you were talking a lot about the migration of commuters into Sonoma to support the tourist industry and the hospitality. I would love to see if we could bring that down to a little finer detail where how many people actually commute from the Springs into the city that actually work in the city, because I think that would be a valuable piece of data. And lastly, under the water situation, under existing conditions, there is one thing that is going on in our water supply that you may not be aware of, and that is there is going to be the elimination of a dam, Potter Valley Dam, and that's going to kind of change the dynamic of the flow of the water from the Eel River into the Russian River, and it could have some implications to our other water resources rather than the 8 wells we have in city limits. So I think it would be worthwhile to kind of flesh that out. And Chairman, that's all I've got.
Are you sure?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? I think I have just a couple quick little questions here. I believe the county was also embarking on the general plan process. Is that correct in the valley? Has there been any effort to reconcile with them at this point, or are we that far ahead of them, or do you have any information?
They have not started, so.
Oh, there you go. All right. And then eventually, when you reconcile the report, and we're looking at 2.5 square miles roughly of Sonoma in a much larger valley community versus a county and ultimately the state. But how do you, for all of these elements, knowing that there's outside influence consistently on these things, how do you reconcile that in your final report?
It's a fantastic question. You're going to have varying degrees of tangible specificity in the policies and the action items that make up your general plan. So where the city holds legal powers within your incorporated city boundaries, you can be much more specific. We shall do this, we will do this, we're required to do this. When you start getting into the sphere of influence or the larger valley, lands in the county's legal jurisdiction, you're more likely to see things like collaborate, encourage, support, things like that, where you don't have legal authority power. So you can't mandate that the county do X, Y, Z, but you can coordinate and encourage and support efforts. So you have ample opportunity to state your intentions, to state your desired outcomes, but we'll choose our language carefully based on where the legal authority of the city governance ends at the city limits.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, public comment on this item, the general plan item. I thought there was somebody here that wanted to speak on that. Oh,
Community, sorry,
Oh, I'm
Mayor.
sorry. Yes.
We do have one more part of this
Oh, I'm sorry.
presentation,
Okay.
and then I recommend that we do
all
public
right,
comment
thank
after
you.
that.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. So yeah, part 2 of our discussion is we're going to be embarking on revisions and updates to the city's land use map. So general plan update, you can go ahead and next slide, please. General plan update is really an opportune time to revisit your land use map. So for those that aren't familiar, and I know this group is, your land use map and the corresponding land use designations, which are described in the land use element, they determine what can be built on any given parcel of land within the city, and as well as the city's intentions for lands outside of its boundaries, such as within your sphere of influence. So the map has all the colors. We've got low-density residential, commercial, parks, ag, et cetera. And the land use designations provide that written narrative description. So what are the allowed residential densities, the general category of uses? It is certainly not nearly as specific as a zoning code in terms of, you can have a bank, but not a tattoo parlor, but, it deals more with, commercial uses in general. And again, as we're doing this update, it's really an ideal time to revisit and at least look at the map and the designations. I go into some communities where when you look at the city limits, you might have half of your land vacant. And so land use maps might undergo significant, massive changes because you're attracting massive population growth or new industry. You've got ample vacant land. That is obviously not the city of Sonoma. You've got discrete boundaries, you're surrounded by an urban growth boundary, and you have very few vacant parcels within the city limits. So in communities such as this one, we don't anticipate going in making massive wholesale changes to the land use map, but you certainly could. And so we're assuming these are going to be more targeted updates, key intersections or key neighborhoods, key roadway corridors. As I mentioned, there's really only a small handful of vacant parcels within Sonoma other than those that are designated park, hillside, or agriculture. There is, I flagged this when I was preparing this PowerPoint. One of the tables in the existing conditions report shows that you've got 82 acres of vacant residential land, and this is based strictly off of data maintained by the Sonoma County Assessor's Office. I dug a little deeper onto those parcels, and they're designated park, hillside, and agriculture. So I'm not sure how the Assessor's Office had classified them, but we try to do a little truth testing, but we can't go parcel by parcel and audit the entirety of the assessor's parcel level data. But this one, it just jumped out at me. I was like, wow, they got 82 acres of vacant residential. Where? And I started trying to find the parcels, and again, they were parks and hillside and ag. So for those that really dive deep into this existing conditions report and read all of those data tables, this one jumped out at me and I wanted to flag it. So in terms of some of the community input related to land use, because this was a question we specifically asked at the workshops, we rolled out maps, markers, we had them working in groups. So some of the common themes related to land use that we heard from the community during these workshops were providing more options and opportunities for affordable housing, expanding the local jobs base, preserving and protecting parks, open spaces, historical resources, and public gathering spaces, and also improving connectivity between our residential areas, our public spaces, our retail areas, and our schools. And in addition to the outreach work we did, we had an economic, real estate, and market report prepared as part of the existing conditions report. And I just wanted to highlight some of the key findings from that may have a bearing on some future land use decisions here within the city. So that report noted that Sonoma has very low multifamily residential vacancy rates. You had a 3.4% vacancy rate in your multifamily. That probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. The data and the trends indicate that new multifamily housing with modern amenities could be absorbed into the plan area. And more specifically, the report talked about how young professionals and active empty nesters often seek some of the same amenities in terms of low-maintenance public spaces, access to on-site gyms and rec facilities and things like that. So modern amenity multifamily could do well here in the city. The city has a strong retail base with low vacancy rates and increasing rents, but you have not added inventory or new construction for commercial or retail in the past 10 years. And the report indicated this was likely due to population size and just kind of a natural lack of growth, meaning you might be at that equilibrium for the amount of retail and commercial space that you have now. There is, however, potentially market capacity to accommodate additional lodging and hospitality facilities, hotels, which would benefit the retail sector. However, there are a limited number of sites available inside the city. And there was also recommendations that the city may want to consider expanding and modernizing and improving the office stock to accommodate, among one example of cohorts, remote Bay Area tech employees, and lay the groundwork to attract larger users. You did have higher office vacancy rates, and there was a pretty limited range of the size of office space available, and it was an aging inventory of stock. So those were some of the findings related to that. So in terms of our land use map discussion, again, I am not looking for a vote on we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But we expect to come back and make some adjustments based on what we've heard from the community, what we heard during our first meeting in October, and then any additional feedback you have for us this evening. So some of the prompt questions that I wanted to put before the council and the commission. I'll just get right to it with bullet point number 1. Should we look at increasing residential densities? So that doesn't necessarily mean recoloring the map and saying low density goes away and it all gets replaced with high density. But does low density mean something else? Do we increase the ranges of your low, medium, and high density and bump those upwards to provide for, additional development capacity? Should we be looking at new jobs generating uses in economic sectors beyond Sonoma's traditional retail, wineries, hotel, and tourism? Do we need to do more to attract high-tech or light industrial or research and development? I wanted to pose the question and not make assumptions. Is it safe to assume that all parcels that are designated parks and hillsides should be protected and maintained as is? I would assume the answer is yes, but again, I don't want to come in and be presumptuous and say, well, we're going to turn our parks and hillsides into something else. But if we didn't get direction on that, our presumption would be to probably not touch those land use designations. Are there areas of the city where land use designations should be changed? Do we have commercial corridors that should be transitioning to medium and high density residential, or the other direction? Should we be looking for more mixed use areas? Are there new or revised land use designations that should be considered? So again, you don't have, I don't know that it fits in the community, but you don't have industrial land use designations inside the city or research and development. Should you be looking into different types of land use designations to attract different economic sectors? And then, of course, finally, just the open-ended one. Anything else you'd like to add? So these were my prompt questions. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of the categories of potential changes. But that really concludes my discussion. I have, I think, just one more slide on the steps from here, and then we can jump back into the land use discussion. But just very briefly where we go from here in terms of the general plan update process. We'll begin working on revisions to the land use map and any changes to the land use designation text. We expect we would return to this group, or both bodies, commission and council, to get input and feedback. That would be a much more specific discussion. Hey, we've marked up a map. Here it is. What do we think? Once these bodies are generally comfortable with the direction of any land use changes, we would then expect to hold public workshops to say, hey, community, we're looking at changes to the map. Here's specifically what they are. Come one, come all, learn about it, give us your input. And then we'll dive right into drafting the actual general plan itself, the goals, the policies, and the action items to build around that land use map and support it. And so we absolutely, would be coming back to council and commission to review the elements as those get developed. And that really concludes my presentation. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor. As always, we have sonomacity.generalplan.org. Great one-stop shop for information. All of the reports that I mentioned, they're all posted online, upcoming meetings. It's a great resource. So going back to this land use map discussion, I'll turn it over to you, sir, for any
Okay,
talking
are there
points.
any questions? Yes. Take it away.
on. Okay, Ben, my question is, when you were talking about the current assessment of vacant lots and houses, et cetera, does that include as-built today, or does that include properties that have been entitled, such as the hotel project Sonoma, or any of the other projects that have already been entitled?
The assessor's data is the as-built data as of when the report, and I'd have to check their data, but it's going to be within 12 months of accuracy in terms of,
Is there a way to incorporate what we know is already entitled as we look at this? Because I think we might be looking at some vacant parcels that already have a plan and entitlements.
Yes, we can absolutely compile the list of pipeline projects that the Planning or Community Development Department has, and any parcels that we look at or we get input on, if there's something in the pipeline or it's entitled but not yet built, we wouldn't treat it as a vacant opportunity site, for lack of a better
I
term.
think that'd be helpful. Thanks.
Any other questions? Patricia?
Yeah, before I ask you a question, I just want to thank everybody for all the great work and outreach that you've done. It really is very, very impressive. So I didn't say that earlier, and I apologize, but yes, I really want to, especially, I know that our community development director has been doing a significant amount of work coming into Sonoma and really meeting with lots and lots of people, so I really appreciate that. So I have a question in regards to kind of the general discussions going forward, as to whether or not and I liked all the kind of general areas of discussions that you had laid out. They seem to be appropriate. Is there a way where there is kind of, versus this particular issue areas, kind of a place for a broader discussion for people about like the overall vision and the introduction to the general plan of like what we're really trying to achieve as a community, that is not significant? Like an example would be that we want to be, sorry to say this again, but it is just an example, honestly, a climate tourism designation, or that we want to be a city that is, considered to be, a diversified city and a community that's welcoming, or any of those things, so that actually create kind of the umbrella for some of these other discussions to have a little bit more direction about like what generations from now we're doing this over the next 20 years, but it's to like for, what is the Sonoma we see?
So you have very accurately described really the thrust and the purpose of the first two visioning workshops, and we asked questions very, very similar to how you just articulated them. We had questions such as, what is our vision for the future? Let's write a vision statement, 3-4 sentences on what we value, who we want to be, where we're headed. And so those questions that you're pointing at right now were very much the thrust and the purpose of the initial visioning workshops. And as we conduct additional public outreach, there'll be opportunities for not only specific input on we should be doing X, Y, Z with relation to climate change, for example, or maintaining an eye to the future of, whether ecotourism or the gold standard for sustainability and climate change resiliency. So yes, that was really the thrust of our initial visioning workshops, was to ask those bigger picture questions on what do we value? What are our challenges, and what's our vision for where we want to go as a community 20 years from now?
Thank you, and those will be revisited in some form.
Yes, and we use that feedback from the initial visioning workshops. It's a constant lighthouse for us. Where has this community told us it wants to go? So sometimes we're down in the weeds on looking at the nuances of additional water supply sources and sussing out if we can add groundwater wells to get to a 15% mix of our supply. But that guiding light of what's our vision for the future of the community, something we're constantly referencing back, so that as we're crafting this general plan going from the broad to the specific, we're keeping that vision in mind so we know we're headed on the right trajectory.
Just have one probably simplistic question. As we consider maybe potentially changing land use designations, when we put these ideas out, can they just be ideas? Because I really don't know, for instance, we have in the city some rural residences. And so an idea might be that you change those to higher density, split the lots, things like that. And I don't know what the legality is around that or how to actually approach that. I know the staff knows this.
For our purposes today, toss ideas out. And it doesn't mean that you took a stand and you voted to eliminate single family and change the whole city. You know, it's just, I'm interested in seeing this. What would this look like?
Okay.
And we can suss out ideas. And in terms of legality, you know, we know a few things about that. City attorney knows a few things about that. And what we won't do is bring forward things where like, well, here's an idea, but it's going to put the city in legal jeopardy. The rule of thumb generally is that you can't do an economic taking of a parcel. And so for your example, going from a large lot rural residential to allowing smaller lot multifamily, that doesn't deprive the property owner of positive economic benefit of their property. It might not be what they want to do, might not be their vision for their property or what their neighbor has in mind, but an example where it would be potentially a taking is if you said, well, you've got a commercial piece of land and we're now going to designate it open space. So we've taken away your ability to make economic beneficial use of your land, and that can be legally troublesome to the city. So you can kind of go in one direction and not the other, and you can make changes as long as you didn't strip or remove economic viability of a piece of land that currently had some.
Mr. Vaughn?
You brought up the question about whether or not we want to consider increasing density. You putting together the housing element for us had identified 575 housing opportunities. So with that in mind, and knowing what our current Series 6 RENA number is 311, and given what you've already said, limited land space, would there be a need to increase density?
That is a question that only the city of Sonoma can answer. So legally, to meet your RENA obligations under the sixth cycle,
Yeah.
no, there would not be a need to do that. If your vision for yourself as a community was to take more proactive, aggressive steps to entice and encourage more multifamily housing, then that would be a strategy or a tool at your disposal. Whether that is the right decision or not is not for me to say, but you don't need to
Fair.
make additional changes to meet state mandates related to the sixth cycle housing element.
So the other question I have, what has come out of Sacramento is this is housing imperative of need, great need, and there's been kind of a spirit of getting rid of single-family residential housing zones. Have you been experiencing that topic in other communities? Are people actually taking that seriously, that there is a viable movement to eliminate single-family housing?
I have not personally worked in a community that proactively took those steps beyond what was mandated by the state of California. It is a very controversial topic, and to put it bluntly, lots of communities want to see additional affordable housing. They care about the issue, and then the thought of dramatically changing the character of their single-family neighborhoods without having their hands forced is not a step I have personally seen a community take in the last 3-4 years since Sacramento has really ramped up the severity of these laws.
And my last question has to do with the industrial zones, for which we have none. And given the fact that we have a tight city limit, very little sphere of influence, plus a UGB, is that even on the table?
I don't think so. I don't see it fitting here. I think there's opportunities to possibly expand the types of uses in some of your office, commercial, and mixed-use designations.
Okay.
And then I think we're gonna come back, I think, with some specific policy questions and discussions that you might want to give some thought to. So one potentially controversial one that I'll throw out there is, right now, your commercial, your gateway commercial, and your mixed-use designations all require a residential component. I think that's well-intentioned. You want to try and get more multifamily residential. I believe it's 20 units an acre density. It could be the law of unintended consequences. You might be missing out on retail, commercial, office development because of the fact that you have a residential requirement. So you're seeing a parcel not redeveloped or not built. You're not getting the residential units, and you're also not getting the potential economic development benefits. I can't speak with you parcel by parcel with certainty, but sometimes well-intentioned policies, and that's a carryover from your existing general plan, may not function the way it was intended, and it may not be the most effective tool to get more multifamily housing if that was a city objective.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Mr. Willers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are we asking questions, or are we in the process of making discussion here? I'm just curious, because I have things that I'd like to discuss that aren't directly questions.
Okay, well, I think both. I mean, we've
Okay.
got the consultant here, so.
Okay. Around the topic of residential density, I believe that there's actually a way of raising residential densities in our residential zones that doesn't impact the idea of compatibility, and that is that we can raise residential densities and have the controlling feature the essential scale of a single residential component. And I'll use an example. In our community, we have basically an average, in the single-family zone, average lot size is 5 to 7,500 square feet. If you take a 7,500 square foot lot, a house that can be built on that in the typical RL zone can be 3,000, 3,100 square feet in size. You could also have a fourplex in that 3,200 square feet, and the density of that fourplex would be 23 units to the acre. But you haven't changed the compatibility in the single-family neighborhood in the idea of bulk and scale. So you have a compatible individual building that fits into a single-family neighborhood that's at 23 units to the acre next to a 3,000 square foot house that's at, 5 units to the acre because of its parcel size. So I think there are ways within our community to raise residential densities without setting densities in the zones as maximums. In fact, I would encourage getting rid of maximum densities in our zones and control the impact of the buildings at higher densities via the compatibility scale, height, dimension, setback, location of parking, location of its proximity to the street, so that those higher density units turn into single-family compatible buildings rather than clustered 3-story, 40 units to the acre. You can accomplish the same thing much the way that our traditional neighborhoods actually were created in Sonoma. And that is, there are, if you go on the east side in the traditional neighborhood, there are multifamily units, 4, 6-unit buildings within single-family neighborhoods. And they develop traditionally at those scales and provide the densities that I just talked about, which are actually larger than the densities that we allow in our highest density zones. So I think that we should begin to think about density in those lines. Many people think of density as big, bulky buildings, and really what density is are units in a building. And so that unit size can also be controlled in terms of the bulk that it creates by minimizing the bulk. And so I think that we might want to consider minimum densities for all of zones, certainly, but eliminating the maximum densities and controlling the number of units that we get on an individual parcel within the context of its compatibility with its neighbors.
All right, thank you. I see notes being taken. Any other comments?
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
I'd like to add on to what Mr. Willers has said around, I do support increased densities in a thoughtful way. In our housing element, we had opened the idea that, and there exists today, 3-story buildings within Sonoma. So I think there are corridors, transit corridors, areas that would accommodate 3 stories very nicely. Again, with regard to design, I think there are opportunities for step backs to 3 stories so that we do have compatibility. And so I also think, as I brought up earlier, that there may be opportunities for us to look at the existing land use, not get rid of the single-family homes, but there are large lots. There's rural lots right in the center of the city, and I know they're historically important for the city, but I do think there are opportunities for us to rethink how we might want to use that land. Additionally, there are parcels of land, and this gets down to the parcel level, that are public or owned by the county, that are open space. And one example is around Blue Ring and the Veterans Hall. There's a parking lot there. And, you know, the question there is, are those opportunities for us to partner with the county or with the Veterans Home and Homelessness Program to try to build housing stock that's predominantly for veterans, but can be then secondarily given to other folks at levels of affordability. I also agree that I would like to see us kind of up the density, again, in a thoughtful way, so that we don't destroy the fabric of the compatibility that we have in the city.
Thank you. Mr. Barbos?
Going down to even more specific at the parcel level, I think at some point we want to take a look at some of the parcels that could be changed in terms of how they're currently being used. And I'm thinking now of part of the Sebastiani Winery property, which has a lot of interesting possibilities going forward in terms of creating different uses on that, and it's currently ag, would have to be rezoned. There's a parcel at the end, kind of at the end of Curtin Lane, Oregon Street, a big square. It's got a vineyard and a house on it. And I don't know where that guy's selling his grapes, but looking forward, you know, you're just, the market for grapes is, according to some reports, declining. And that might be and that is immediately adjacent to a multifamily project, and another one there would be worth considering, as well as on the Sebastiani property, along with other uses. So I just throw those two parcels out because we don't have much land left that could be developed in any larger scale, because we're pretty built out in terms of with urban growth boundaries, and just all we've most of the larger parcels have already been developed. So those are a couple thoughts.
Mr. Wyrick?
Thanks. Kind of to piggyback. It's working? Piggyback off of what Commissioner Barbos was saying, I would love, in terms of existing land use, I'd love to look at.
Mr. Wyrick, you're not transmitting, or you need to hold it close to your mouth.
Hello?
No.
I would love to look at land use designations, particularly around our some of our commercially zoned land, that would allow for the conversion of some of our existing large 1970s era shopping centers into housing potentially, or at least allow or maybe incentivize that process to start happening, because we have a lot of, in my view, we have a lot of commercial space, we have a lot of underutilized commercial space.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this is like a free-for-all, free-flowing, with regard to your idea about potentially removing residential from commercial. I mean, it's an interesting idea, but I think in order for that to maybe be useful, we'd really have to do this conversion of the mixed use to more residential, so that we could balance out that. And really understand if that is a reason why we haven't had commercial development, or if that's just, or if it's, as it was in your report, just that we've kind of plateaued off. You know, again, I think thoughtfully thinking what would be the trade-offs, or what's the real need for that commercial versus getting rid of the residential, or increasing the mixed use to more residential.
Mr. Willers?
Yeah, I'd like to pick that line of thought up as well. And I think that, you know, the commercial zone could easily be the flip of the mixed use zone, much the way that the state law allows it, when it allows residential to now become, or commercial buildings now to become residential buildings. And, you know, ours is a 50-50 mix for both of the zones. I could easily see basically a 30-70 or a 33-66, 2/3, 1/3, for the 1/3 commercial, 2/3 for the mixed use housing. And then for the commercial, the flip of that, 2/3 commercial, 1/3 housing as a way of mitigating that. But the idea of losing that as an element of our general plan or of our zoning, I think would be a loss actually to the city.
All right. Seeing nothing else, we will open this for public comment.
Actually, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Because I mean, I have a lot more comments about many of these questions, and I don't know how you
Well,
can organize that.
Yes. First of all, I would encourage everybody to participate in any of the public sessions and contribute accordingly. Because we do have another meeting, I would recommend that we try to provide that directly through community development to the consultant.
All right, I have several pages. I'll just submit them to you, Jennifer.
Mr. Guon, is that?
That's correct. We
Okay.
we are going to postpone the meeting to about 6:15 to give some time at least.
Please try. She can't.
Oh, you can? Okay. Okay. Well, what we're going to do is if at 6 o'clock it's going to switch over to the council meeting online. So if you are watching online, please note that you will need to log out of this and log into the council meeting that starts at 6 p.m. You'll stay. Okay, great. So you're
Okay.
good to go, Mayor. Ignore everything I said and just
Okay.
move forward. And you're good
I'm
to
pretty
go.
good at that. All right. I'm going to say thank you very much. I think we've got a couple of people that wanted to speak to the general plan, and I'm going to have to limit you to the 3-minute time frame. So, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Cornwall, and I was going to ask for your indulgence to speak both as Sonoma Valley Collaborative and then subsequently as Sonoma Ecology Center, just because it's easier to get one person here than two people. But you're really crammed up with the next item, and I wonder if I should just sit down and shut up and write a letter instead.
Well, please submit your comments
Yeah.
if you would like. And I know that Jennifer is more than
Yeah.
happy to meet with you if that's required.
Yeah. I guess I would just say one thing that there are like some important goal statements that the City Council and Planning Commission have made that you, like in your goal setting, that it seems like the existing conditions report provides a great opportunity to baseline those so you can measure change in them if you want, that aren't there now, aren't in the existing conditions report. So that's one of the things that we would like to mention. I think there just really isn't time to go into all the comments, so I'm just going to sit down.
All right. No, thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to try to run through my points real quick here. First of all, I would suggest to update the land use map so that single-family zoning can be dialed back to about 25% of the total and upzone all residential areas to capture the underutilized space in the single-family zoning areas to an equal mix of high, medium, and mixed-use zoning. I'd get rid of housing opportunity sites because they're not working. They keep getting eaten up by market-rate projects. With the open space, I would give the St. Francis Preserve to satellite affordable housing and let them deal with fish and wildlife, and then get 100% affordable housing on that. I think the existing conditions report has too general a view, and significant local differences are not seen. We need to see the actual. So if the land use map can identify areas of building construction, I think the general plan can do better to show local socioeconomic diversity, particularly between the east and west side, which is a substantial difference. I did a demonstration block group study, and I didn't see any reference to that, so I feel like a lot of my comments go into a black hole. So I think that the existing conditions report can't be so general as to be inaccurate by omission. With the ESRI data, I have to object to that it's private data and it can't be double-checked or we can't see what's left out. That's not right to have a public document with private data sources. So I would suggest that that I have a problem trusting that. And so I did suggest that that the existing conditions report has inaccurate citations, and to be more accurate, need local sources. And I suggested those local sources, and in particular, there was one where it said a 0.03% of people in Sonoma were food insecure. That's completely at odds with the Catalyst Fund study that showed that 1 in 5 people are insecure in Sonoma Valley. So you need to calibrate a lot of this stuff with local studies that I cited and sent in before. I would like to see more affirmatively furthering fair housing and equity focus. Let's see, and I would see reconcile conflicting goals of exclusivity and inclusivity. I don't see a way that the city can value both of those. How do you come out with that? You have to kind of map out what's the priority and not have two conflicting goals and then let people fight it out over time. I would like to see the city admit there's a history and pattern of segregation, and that the 70 to 75% single-family homes in zoning